So as civilization edges closer to the Skynet singularity, when technology becomes self-aware and we're all converted into batteries to power the matrix, conversations about the limits of artificial intelligence and the ethical implications of AI are becoming more and more common. And so I see the conversation around sex robots as an offshoot of this larger conversation about artificial intelligence and its implications. Now, you've probably seen feminist articles warning that sex robots are a sign of patriarchal oppression. Usually these articles are unbelievably shallow and self-centered in their analysis, focusing solely on the non-issue of objectification of the women's. There's even a website dedicated to campaigning against sex robots. These articles almost never mention that some women are interested in male versions, or that heterosexual couples, lesbians and disabled men are all customers of sex robot or sex doll makers. Nor is there any recognition of the fact that men have much stronger sexual drives than women. Men have between 10 and 20 times the amount of testosterone. Women's sexual drive tends to fade after marriage, whereas men's doesn't. Men tend to think more about sex, they masturbate more, and prostitution is still mostly a phenomenon of men seeking sex with women rather than the other way around. Even priests violate their chastity vows more often than nuns, and men are just more eager to engage in casual sex. In a 1989 study, 75% of men on various college campuses agreed to have sex with a complete stranger, whilst 0% of the women agreed. That was replicated in a Denmark study in 2010 that found 59% of men agreed to have sex with a stranger and 0% of women. A year later in France, a replication attempt found 83% of men willing and just 3% of women. But of course, rule number one for feminists is to deny any innate differences between men and women and pretend we're all the same. However, we are expected to indulge the emotional needs of women, but talk about men's need for sex? Well, that's just perpetuating rape culture. And so with that little rant out of the way, I wanted to talk about a report I recently read from Responsible Robotics, Our Sexual Future with Robots, a Foundation for Responsible Robotic Consultation report. So the report's 44 pages long, and there's one part that echoes the views of fainting couch feminists about protecting the women's from creepy sex robot rapists. But for the most part, it's very informative and well worth the read if you're into that sort of stuff, you freak. So obviously I'm not going to go through 44 pages, but I wanted to pick out some interesting points and add some of my own thoughts. So this will be less empirically based than normal, but hopefully still worthwhile listening to. So the first 5 pages or so are devoted to the current state of technology in the sex robot world. And the key takeaway for me is that whilst there's a lot of demand and thus a lot of competition in the sex robot market, what's actually on offer today and the science fiction versions of sex robots in movies like Ex Machina or TV shows like Humans and Westworld is vastly different. That is to say, I think we are probably decades away from something like Dolores from Westworld, and that what will bridge the gap in the meantime will be a combination of virtual reality and sex toys, including but not limited to sex robots, and some of those alternatives are highlighted in the report. But I was also surprised at the progress they've made with artificial intelligence already. Here's a short clip about the Harmony robot.
This is Harmony, the natural evolution of the real doll. When she debuts later this month, she'll be offered as a $20 per year service for Android users. Like Siri for phone sex. What's your favorite sex position?
Don't get me wrong, but I'm not that kind of girl.
You are really annoying.
I'm sorry, Christopher. I didn't mean to annoy you. Please forgive me.
It's engineered in such a way that it's going to learn from the interactions that it has. So the more people that are interacting with it on the basic levels, each person will have a different variant of the AI because they're able to assign personality traits to their version. They're able to give their version a specific name, and their version will have specific moods that will influence their behavior. How are you feeling today?
I'm in a good mood for a Tuesday.
Can you say hello to my friends?
Hello, Matt's friends. It is very nice to meet you. I hope everything is well with you.
What's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is Prometheus, Ex Machina, Forrest Gump, Interstellar on No Planet.
So I think that shows that the AI is still in its infancy, but it's not difficult to imagine the trajectory of where it goes from here. However, I think most people would still see these dolls as residing in the uncanny valley. Maybe that's just me, but I personally couldn't get interested until it was progressed to the point of passing an in-the-flesh Turing test, literally not being able to tell the difference between a robot and a human, and not just visually but interactively. And it appears we are presently a long way from that reality. So the report then goes on to examine a few popular questions about sex robots. The first being, would people have sex with a robot? And the report cites some surveys. A small study in the US of 100 participants between the age of 20 and 61 found that 2/3 of males were in favour of using sex robots, whilst almost 2/3 of females were against it. Now that's probably not surprising, but I went to the actual study, and one thing that was surprising was that the researchers found that millennials were less in favour of using sex robots as a substitute for prostitution. The presumption was that younger people who are more acquainted with technology would be more open to it, but perhaps that reflects a more Puritan attitude towards sex in general. A study in the UK of 1,000 adults showed 17% of people would be prepared to go on a date with a robot, and that number increased to 26% for a robot that looked exactly like a human. And that illustrates the point that it matters how the questions are asked in such surveys. But from the literature, the report concludes on that question that there's a significant demand, more obviously from men than women, but there's still a significant number of women that would be interested. The second question asks, what kind of relationship could we have with a sex robot? The authors cite Scarlett Johansson's character in the movie Her as being ideal in terms of AI that can converse fluently and react to emotions appropriately. The problem is we still don't understand how our own human emotions work, so it's obviously a difficult task to recreate it artificially. And there's a lot of doubt about whether you can form a genuine emotional relationship with a robot because it can't be reciprocated. It can only be faked. And this, they contend, is a problem because even men that see prostitutes crave authenticity. As a former sex worker said, almost every client I ever saw, though, wanted me to have at least one orgasm during the course of our appointment. They all seemed to want to make me come as much as I didn't want to come, and they tried everything. When all else failed, they simply requested or demanded that I come for them. Don't fake it, they almost always said. I can tell when a woman's faking, which I would speculate is said precisely because they can't tell. But I'm not completely convinced by this idea. Deep down, every man has to know on some level that she's faking it to some degree, especially those that go for the girlfriend experience and are looking for more intimacy than just sex. I lived in Thailand for a while, and I was always struck by the number of men that fell for Thai hookers. Some even end up marrying them. At least some portion of them seem to be quite happy to live under the illusion that the woman genuinely cared about them. And there's an easy way to find out. Just withdraw the money from the relationship and see what happens. Now, one may cynically observe that that happens in conventional relationships if the money dries up. But the point is, does the AI really need to be able to genuinely reciprocate feelings, or does it just need to be really good at faking them? The authors then give an example of men who've formed relationships with passive, non-moving sex dolls. Senji Nakamura married with 2 kids who said that he bought it originally for sex, but after 2 months fell in love with it. She needs much help, but still is my perfect partner, who shares precious moments with me and enriches my life. I wonder what his wife thinks. Another example is Phil, a 58-year-old man from the island of Jersey. He bought his robot for sex and now pushes it around in a wheelchair everywhere he goes. People in his area have accepted it and see nothing wrong with him taking it down to the pub with his friends. I think that's a pub I'd like to visit. So never underestimate a man's ability to suspend disbelief. Now, the third question is, will robot sex workers and bordellos be acceptable? Now, this seems like an unequivocal yes, and the survey alluded to earlier in the US backs that up, as it showed that on a scale of 1 to 7, 7 being completely appropriate, the average score was 6. There also seems to be some hope that this has the possibility of ending forced prostitution and sex trafficking, but that could just be wishful thinking, as sex workers report their clients want, Quote, the pretense of a relationship, getting under your skin or pissing you off. They want more than a fake orgasm. They want to get inside the heads of the workers. They want to get drunk and stoned with them and pretend that they are in genuine relationships. They want to take control of another human and reach into their emotional life. For these clients, a robot would be a pale reflection, a fictional shadow of a human. So again, it depends how good the AI is. Does it come with a complete backstory and character? Again, we're obviously nowhere near that today. Now, question 4 brings in the feminist alarmist. You've heard all the arguments before that it reinforces gender stereotypes about women being subordinate to men, and that because most engineers are male, they are transferring their heteronormative and sexualized versions of women onto the objects they produce. Even the authors get in on the act when they say, it's certainly an unfortunate fact that males dominate the engineering industries. Do you ever hear anyone say it's an unfortunate fact that females dominate the kindergarten teaching profession? This is a typical feminist complaint. Computer games sexualize women because they're made by mostly men. But instead of becoming an IT engineer and creating their own games, they'll try to shame game creators into making games the way they want them to. Anyway, question 5 asks, could intimacy with robots lead to greater social isolation? I think this is a very real potential problem because you don't have to engage in the normal, often complex human interactions and form relationships. A sexual relationship is easier with a robot, and you're obviously not going to get rejected by a robot. Well, if you did, you probably know you're a real loser. Anyway, a common reaction would be for many, yeah, but I don't have to put up with the moodiness, the shit tests, and all the other crap that goes along with a conventional relationship. But if it were too easy, wouldn't that take some of the excitement away? What about the thrill of the chase? Anyway, one study found that 20% of people thought companion robots could decrease loneliness, while 14% said they could increase social isolation. Now, question 6 is related to that last point. In some cases, for the elderly, for example, it would seem that robots in general could reduce loneliness. Pets are used for therapy already, so why not robots? But it's quite another question as to whether old people want to bang their robots. And of course, there's an argument that social misfits or people with certain social anxieties that can't form conventional relationships could benefit. Now, the last question is obviously a touchy subject. Would sex robots help to reduce sex crimes? There are all types of sex crimes, but the one most concerning to most people is paedophilia. The mere suggestion that sex robots be produced for paedophiles is bound to disgust people. But you have to ask the question, if sex dolls could significantly reduce the rate of child molestation, wouldn't you be ethically obliged to do it? As revolting as the idea of a pedo molesting a child doll, surely that's preferable to molesting a human child. But there is the opposite argument that such robots would have a reinforcing effect. Here's a quote from robot ethicist Patrick Lynn. Treating pedophiles with robot sex children is both a dubious and repulsive idea. Imagine treating racism by letting a bigot abuse a brown robot. Notice how he assumes the racism would be white on black. Would that work? Probably not. If expressing racist feelings is a cure for them, then we wouldn't see much racism in the world. Fighting fire with fire may work in very specific contexts, such as treating heroin addicts with methadone, but not generally. That's why the expression is so surprising. This shows that the ethics of sex robots goes beyond whether anyone is physically harmed. There may be other issues at stake, such as moral character, psychological effects, social taboos, the ethical limits of experiments and therapy, and more. It's not as simple an issue as some people think. There's also the issue of rape as depicted in the show Westworld. Well-heeled travellers can act out their fantasies for a price. The question is whether this satiates a fantasy by living it out, or does it whet the appetite for more? Do we want to encourage that kind of behaviour, or is it just harmless acting out? Is it the same baseless argument about the effects of video games? We've all been told that violent video games would make kids violent. However, whilst the popularity of video games have increased exponentially over the last 3 decades, violent crime has been coming down. I mean, if a robot cost you the price of a new car, you'd have an incentive to look after it. You might be inclined to treat it with more care than a human, in the same way some pet lovers care more about their pets. Unless, of course, you're an eccentric, evil billionaire that can afford to buy robots by the container load and play a version of the Hunger Games on your vast estate. Anyway, this is all starting to get a bit weird, and that's probably more than you wanted to hear about on the topic of sex robots. Personally, I can't get excited about it until we can cross the uncanny valley, and I think that's decades away. So what are your thoughts on sex robots? Are you open to the possibility, or is it just too weird to even contemplate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.